is Fusion Capitalism, a clean energy vision for conservatives. Brought to you by industry leader and company CEO, Steve Malink. Here's Steve.
Thanks for joining me for part 2 of my conversation with Jeff Eckel, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer at Hannon Armstrong. Jeff's company invests billions each year in environmentally responsible projects. Jeff, we all know that the tech industry exploded in Silicon Valley, the banking industry in New York. Is there a certain part of the country where you've seen significant growth in clean energy?
You know, I think it's interesting. Probably most commentators would say it's California, but when you look at the wind industry, it's Iowa. It's the heartland of the U.S. Red states have driven the wind industry to incredibly well-engineered economic physical systems. These modern wind turbines are fantastic. So it's very much a national phenomena. We're the largest investor in U.S. military energy efficiency and readiness assets. And we're in all 50 states or maybe 49 states. Energy efficiency is a national, global phenomena. There's no one place where the U.S. government doesn't want to save the taxpayer money, save on carbon emissions, and improve conditions for the warfighter. It's truly we've invested around the globe wherever the U.S. military exists, and it makes these facilities far more resilient for these storms. One great example is Marine Corps base at Parris Island, where a resiliency investment went in that was energy efficiency, solar, and storage, and allows the Marine Corps base to operate in island mode when it's forced to during hurricanes up to 80% of the time, which is a fantastic bit of independence.
Yeah. So you invest in projects in the U.S. and for the U.S., outside the U.S. Are you investing in projects for other countries?
If we're outside of the U.S., it's related to the U.S. government.
Okay. In your opinion, what other companies are the real leaders in this clean energy revolution? Are they American companies? And do you see them mostly in finance or in manufacturing or in some other sector of our economy? Who are the companies besides Hannon Armstrong that are really pioneering and leading the charge in this new era?
There's so many great companies, and we're fortunate to call them, many of them our clients. Some are global companies. Siemens and Schneider would be two good examples. NG is another great example. And in the U.S., also global companies. You have Trane Technologies, Johnson Controls, Honeywell. Ameresco is doing a terrific job developing. They're not a manufacturer of equipment, but they're developing some really terrific projects, and glad to have them as a client. So these are the companies that are really engineering these solutions. They have the hard job. Our goal is to provide capital to make sure that they can grow their business and we can close these asset investments aerodynamically.
I see. In the past, you've said that banks and investors must ask themselves, does this investment accelerate or slow climate change? Why have most banks and investors been slow to adopt this line of thinking?
Fossil fuel investing has been extremely profitable for years. JP Morgan makes a lot of money. Bank of America makes a lot of money. Wells Fargo, the same. It's not as profitable as it used to be. And it's hard for anybody to give up a profitable business. We have a particular view, and I think time is proving our view to be quite prudent, that change has to happen much faster. When companies make a net zero pledge, that's interesting in that you're basically netting out your carbon emissions, but that's not really getting us to where Hannon Armstrong is, which is net negative emissions. That's what has to happen to reverse the worst impacts of climate change. If we're to get to a 1.5 degrees C or 2 degrees C average global temperature, net zero isn't going to get it done. It has to get net negative.
So is that saying that we need to pull carbon out of the atmosphere to prevent?
Yes, you have to do two things. You have to stop producing incremental carbon as the fossil fuel banks, continue to invest in those those industries. And there has to be some level of carbon capture and storage. The technology is not economic yet, but it better get there because we need it.
Okay. Is there an investment of the hundreds of projects you've invested in that you're particularly proud of?
I'm particularly proud of all of them in the sense that they have created this portfolio effect. And again, I've been doing this about 40 years, and this may be my third or fourth green boom. The other earlier ones all ended badly with levels of enthusiasm and perhaps a lack of realism. This green boom is not going to end badly. That doesn't mean there won't be winners and losers. Markets are rough places to work. There will be. But the long-term trend of investing in climate positive investments like we do is, I think, helped in part by the fact that we have so many investments, over 200. It's not going to be one large investment that gets to a climate change solution profitably. It's going to be a series of relatively small investments, and we've been the pioneer in that field.
Yeah, that's great. You've been CEO of Hannon Armstrong since 2013. So that means you've overseen the company during a Democratic administration, a Republican administration, and now another Democratic administration. How does the occupant in the White House affect what you do, if at all?
Let me go back even further and say that I lost my job at Hannon Armstrong in 1989 when a solar tax credit expired. And I learned the hard way with two little kids that you should not count on Congress to do the right thing in the right way at the right time for your business. We have always focused on assets that are economic, regardless of federal policy. That's why I'm such a big fan of energy efficiency, is it generally doesn't need any subsidies, and it's very impactful on carbon. Public policy does matter, however. It doesn't necessarily affect our business, but it very much affects the trajectory of the industry. The last 4 years under the prior administration, the industry did just fine. It just didn't do enough. Under the Biden administration, we're hopeful to have a tailwind for this industry. And I think, we've talked a little bit about pricing carbon. One of the things that I think is a fundamental piece of that, and I think you agree with me, is dividending the proceeds back to citizens. I also think there has to be a level of energy transition for traditional fossil fuel workforce. Growing up in Ohio in the 70s, Japanese car imports were devastating to the Midwest. You got some fascinating cars out of it, but disruption hurts. And I think there's no doubt we are having a disruption in the energy sector. We also have the ability to make that transition for traditional fossil fuel workforce much less painful than it was in the car industry.
Okay. It seems that ESG investing is here to stay, and you could say maybe even going mainstream, but your investment ethos is going one step beyond, making sure that every investment is carbon neutral or better, I guess. Is that a correct way of saying you're different from just basic ESG investing?
Well, I think there's let's separate it into the three components. The environmental aspect is clearly embedded in the DNA of our company. We are making climate positive investments and only climate positive investments. I think we do very well in the E. Governance, we've been very focused. I've watched too many public companies do too many stupid things to hurt their shareholders, to allow any compromises in governance. We have a very terrific board with good diversity and good independence. They ask great questions and challenge us, and that's what shareholders should expect. The S aspect, social, has been one that I think we've been supportive and positive. I don't think any company has been as much of a leader as 2020 showed we need to be. So we have stepped up our efforts in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And we hope to continue to show that there are shareholder benefits to that. At the same time, there are benefits to employees. It turns out that the passionate investment team at Hannon Armstrong that cares so much about climate change also cares about social issues. And that has been one of the great learnings for our company in 2020. And I'm excited about the progress we're making on that. These are not separate things. There is an intersection between climate change and social justice, and we're going to get at that intersection.
Great. Jeff, I've been trying to help lead this clean energy industry in the small way that I can.
I love your business.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm embarrassed to say that Hannon Armstrong wasn't on my radar screen. Given all the leadership you're doing in this space, it seems like your story has not been made as public as it should be. Do you take a quiet approach to what you're doing intentionally, or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think, yes, we're not a very promotional-oriented firm. That said, I think we have found our voice, and opportunities like this, Steve, are welcome to get our story out. Somebody once said to me that Goldman Sachs had a branding problem until they started to make people money. And maybe we've taken that approach. Mm-hmm. Let's make people money. And now we're entering our 8th year with beating the S&P 500 in total shareholder return by 2x. That's a good track record. We do want to step up our leadership in this area. We've made a lot of mistakes. We've learned a lot of lessons, and I think people can learn from us, because it's going to take a lot more investment, a lot more companies like Hannon Armstrong to actually make a meaningful difference in carbon reductions.
Yeah, I agree. I guess my last question is, can you tell us about your plans for the future? Maybe even beyond Hannon Armstrong. Where do your passions lie?
I was fortunate to come across a wonderful piece of property in Western Maryland. We have a family foundation that's going to take care of this property. We'll be reforesting it in partnership with Trout Unlimited, and turning it into a much more sustainable watershed for the Savage River, bringing back native species. We even have an eye on bringing back some chestnuts. At the end of the day, we do have to take care of the earth in order for it to take care of us. And there's been lack of care in some areas. So to me, that's a passion of mine, is to reforest things, see what happens with the birds and the animals, and maybe drop a line and catch and release a trout.
Well, I think there has to be a book to be written in there somewhere. I think you've gotten a unique perspective from everything I've seen and heard about your company, and I'm just so glad to see that there's companies like at least one company out there doing what you're doing, maybe inspiring others to follow your example.
Well, I've learned from some great people who've written on these topics for 40 or 50 years, and it's wonderful that it's actually in 2020 that climate change is going mainstream. People are seeing the impacts. It isn't political. People know the weather is different. How we talk about it probably needs to be improved. And I think our contribution is, and maybe our single best contribution, is to prove our investment thesis that will earn better risk-adjusted returns investing on the right side of the climate change line. At the end of the day, money talks.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great way to end the podcast. Jeff, thanks for your time.
Thank you for your interest, and keep up the good work on the HVAC business.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to Fusion Capitalism. To find out more about Steve Malink and his book, go to fusioncapitalism.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.